session? All right. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Our next session is obviously something that's very important to me as a surgeon, and I'm really lucky to have two of my colleagues here with me to discuss the future of surgery, innovation, and technology, which is going through major changes since the pandemic, and we'll discuss those, of course, at length. So I'm going to get them to introduce themselves rather than me introduce them. So we start with Ian Hennessy from Alderhay.
So, hi everyone. Is this? Yeah, it's working. Hi everyone, I'm Ian Hennessy. I'm a consultant paediatric emergency surgeon up at Alderhay Children's Hospital in the northwest of England. That's half my job, but the other half of my job is to get to be the clinical director of innovation there. And I founded this 1,000 square metre underground bat cave type environment for creating new types of technology and actually deploying it into healthcare so that it makes an impact. So that's me.
Hi everyone, I'm Rajesh Prakasam. I'm a transplant surgeon from Bard's Health. Used to be with this man here. And I'm also a robotic surgeon as well. I do robotic renal failure surgery. And I would say that I'm a very unhappy doctor in general. I'll tell you why that is. Because I think what we do at the moment is we build up the problems. We are looking for solutions inward. More people, more beds. But there are the people here on the panel, or we are the converted ones. We see the possibilities, what innovation can do, and how that can change or address some of the problems, not replace the staff. So really, that's why I'm here. And my main work is what I described, transplant surgery and robotics. But my other part is enabling technology solutions into healthcare. So I'm involved in validating products and working with Shafi on education and many streams. So I'm delighted to be here.
Great, well, thank you. So we've got the two right people in the audience who are pushing the boundaries of innovation and, more importantly, implementation. That's the key. You can talk about innovation as much as you like, because how do surgeons, practicing surgeons, use that technology and showcase it? I'll come to Ian first. So Ian's done some amazing work, by the way, and he's an inspiration for a lot of us in his work at Alderhay, and innovation, particularly during the pandemic. So Ian, I'd love to hear more about the innovation that you've created during the pandemic, what's driven you, and the whole centre that you have now, Alderhay.
Yeah, so the pandemic, again, was great from an innovation point of view because all of a sudden we had a lot of the limits taken off us, a lot of seed funding, and we were all focused on one problem, one really pressing problem. And at the time, it was PPE. So we went on and we created a huge amount of PPE. And one of my favourite stories is this actually turned out to be a failure, okay? But I really love it, so I'm going to talk about it. It's got a special place in my heart. And I think it shows what we should be able to do on a day-to-day basis is that at the start of the pandemic, it was all about contact spread. COVID had nothing to do with the air. It was all about contact spread. And we'd run a competition for children around the space station and how to make the space station cleaner. And I'd had this idea that what if you could have your own personal handle that you could carry around the space station? You could 3D print it in copper impregnated plastic, and you could open doors with it. And you'd have your own personal handle, therefore you never touch any other surface that you hadn't touched before yourself. So we thought, right, let's do it. Let's do it in our own hospital. What do we carry around with us all the time? ID badges. So we created an ID badge that could also open doors. Now the thing that I want to talk about in this is that normally when you're doing innovation in a healthcare service, you're thinking, is this going to take 5 or 7 years? Whereas instead, what we did was like, right, we've got this great idea. We worked with a company. That company reached out to other companies because everybody wanted to help us. We got permission from the hospital immediately. I got one email confirmation for the funds to kick it off. And so for £5,000, we created injection molds. We created numerous prototypes. We had something that was on the Amazon marketplace 8 weeks after our first idea, and we were already selling it. And out it went. Why is that not always the case? Why is it that we're stuck in this kind of repeating cycle of trying to get permission to do something, not being able to find the money for it, not being able to progress it, having something which is a good idea, but it just doesn't seem to land and never actually gets into position. And the reason that I like it is that even although we now know that contact spread isn't a thing, I still see members of staff with this distancer because they still don't like touching the door handles. And I see them all around the hospital, and it's like, oh, cool, we actually did something, and it went out there.
Yeah, incredible. And so it showed how we can innovate rapidly, and pandemic has shown that we can do things and implement change. Raj, tell me some of the innovations you've been working on recently over and above your robotic program at the Royal London.
So one of the products we are I'm engaged in about a year and a half ago is a tool for remote monitoring of patient care. So the patient group I look after are people with chronic diseases. Kidney failure, which just means that once they are diagnosed, they have to come to the hospital on many occasions, have to have many blood tests and a lot of appointments on top of their therapy need, which is 3 times to the hospital for what we call as a dialysis treatment. So these people are prisoners of the care system itself. They don't have a life. So therefore, I looked out for solutions. So in LinkedIn, I was looking for information, and I found this CEO said, oh, we found this tool, which they've been doing it in the US. So I reached out to them. Then really, this is a spy patch. We put them on a sort of AV fistula. It's a sort of blood vessel which we create by surgery and use it for dialysis. So it measures the vitals, heart rate, blood pressure, saturation. And on top of that, it measures sodium, potassium, and creatinine, some of the blood tests. I'll be talking about that in the next at 12 o'clock in here about how it sort of changed our approach. And exactly what you said, it's really that I think there is a big space between the amazing tech solutions, what's available, and the biggest problem we have. And there is a space there. And what we did was exactly the same. It was they had a lot of approval difficulties. We went through a model, what we call as a service evaluation, which means the whole process of discussion to starting a pilot study was 3 months. So we helped them with the early validation, which is now FDA approved. So what that means is really, I think if there is right champions, right problem identified by the clinical teams, maybe a doctor or a nurse, with the organization, which is, they're always been difficult, there always will be the challenges, but if you have the right people, we can really get that into practice at the research level to start with, and then to full clinical service. But what was exciting was that the possibility to see something which we can get into a space where there's no other solution when I was looking for it. So, and what I learned from that experience was that it is possible, as Ian was saying, that if you put it in the right way with the right group of people, explaining to the organization the urgent need for it, we can enable integration of these things. Yeah.
What I like about both these two surgeons here, they're very innovative in doing some blue sky thinking, but actually what they're creating is relevance. And it's about the validation. So both Ian and Raj are very, they hold the validation part very important to their hearts. You've got to validate, you've got to do research to showcase this is of a value rather than just throwing technology at a problem. So how do you approach the validation, the clinical trials? Because that's quite difficult with innovation.
Yeah, this is a really difficult problem that we continue to grapple with. Because I personally feel that if you've come up with an idea, you're probably the wrong person to be saying whether or not it's good or not. Okay? Because you're massively biased, because you've created it, you love it, you think it's the right thing. And I've seen this happen time and time again in my own department where we've come up with an idea and we think it's brilliant and we push it and push it and push it and put some resource into it. And then when we hand it out to external person and they test it and they go, actually this doesn't work, and we're like, oh god, we got blinded. So what we've been building is this transitional point between our innovation hub and our research department, so that when we have an idea we can get it validated. So we now have actually a physician associate whose specific job is the interface between research and innovation, and also to change the time cycles, because validation of new technologies is too long. So you'll often find a technology which has been beautifully validated but is now horribly out of date because it took 6 years to do it. And we need 6-month cycles, maybe even 3-month cycles, so that we can iterate, change, they can hand it back to us, they can tell us when to kill a project early because we are often just very biased. So it's that research and innovation handover that is really critical, so that you can push things out there which are actually useful.
Yeah. And Raj, you're into your papers. You're like a paper factory, is Raj at Royal London. Tell me about your process and thought process around that.
I think what Ian said is absolutely true, which is that we do not need randomized controlled trials to integrate a technology. What the clinical pharma we used to do many years ago, digital, what I call as a digital pharma, which is, I think, in my head, that's what it needs to be. It shouldn't need to go through that because you cannot compare two tech products. They are different for different patient groups, different countries, and so on. So therefore, and also, we need to partner with organizations, let's say a startup. They do not have a lot of time. So that's why I totally agree. It has to be a quick cycle so that the industry partner who comes along, they know that they can invest the time and money, which we do not have to start with. So therefore, for the way I think, and I've been doing it, is that really do a quick cycle of a study, what we would call as early validation. That also helps the sort of industry partner to go to investors and say, there is this data. So therefore, which just means that it's mutually beneficial and potentially successful outcome. And the other thing I would say is partnering with the patient groups early on. I mean, I've got my patient going to talk at 12 o'clock. When you start with them, they are the end users. So when we started working with the remote patch, the team was with us for a week in my team, in our hospital, looking at how the patch can be used. So therefore, they got inside, sort of from the end user point of view, this is what is needed. And my dialysis nurse is sitting there. She was telling them, oh, no, it needs to be placed there. So therefore, not only the product is validated, it was helping in the evaluation as well. So early partnership, going for quick cycles, not longed out study. I think those are the two key things I learned.
I think you're right, because one of the things that's troubled surgery for a long time is the notion of the randomized controlled clinical trial as the gold standard. We know that comparing two things it takes about 7 years, by the way, before you run a randomized controlled trial before you implement change. Around about 5 to 7 years. In 7 years, the world has moved on 100 years. And already you're obsolete. By the time you found the solution, it's no longer relevant. And that's been a problem all along, which is what we're discussing. How do you overcome what's traditionally thought to be gold standard, create new models of innovation rapidly for implementing across the healthcare system, particularly surgery, which is intervention-based, right? So that's kind of the discussion we're having. I'd love to get you more of your thoughts around what does good look like in the new world? How do university departments embrace that new way of working? Is it still a problem for us?
Yeah, so again with the health service is that the biggest problem I find is finding balance between doing the day-to-day and doing the basics really, really well, but then also having the breakthroughs. And you find this balance, it shifts backwards and forwards. Now, during COVID, things shifted towards let's go for something completely new and breakthrough. And then at the moment, everyone's like, oh my God, we've got this massive waiting list. We just need to just knuckle down and just do more of what we've been doing. Now, I personally am never a fan of just do more of what you're currently doing, and that's how you'll get out of the hole. I personally, because I am, director of innovation, like to try and find that way around the sides. But I feel, as the money in the health service gets shorter and shorter, that drive towards trying to find a new breakthrough is more difficult. So it needs to have voices within the health service that are like, okay, it's fine.
Yep.
We need to keep the basics going, but we also need to be able to think about new ways to do this. An example being, we are really behind in outpatient appointments. There are certain conditions that if you just sent me one picture of it, I could tell you if I need to see them or not. I don't need a 15-minute appointment. So instead of doing a 15-patient outpatient clinic, let's set it up. I'll look at 300 pictures in one sitting, and I will do, kind of 10 outpatient clinics in one go.
That's interesting.
More difficult to get people to convince you to do that, even although that might sort our problem.
Okay.
And it's trying to kind of They're like, no, just do more extra clinics. I'm like, yeah, but we could
Yeah,
actually,
makes no
we
sense.
could break through this.
Yeah, it makes sense. But as a colorectal surgeon, please don't send pictures. I really can't deal with too many into my inbox. I'm joking, of course. I do get them sometimes, actually. I have to confess.
Yeah.
And they can be an eye-opener. So,
But one thing, Shafi,
Yeah.
about what Ian was saying is that NHS, the most common and easiest thing for the system to say is no. Okay? No is the easiest thing because you don't need to look at anything because for us as a sort of healthcare professionals, our priority is patient care. But at the same time, that system cannot stay the same way. We won't be sitting here doing robotic surgeries and innovation if we didn't push that boundary in a safest way. So therefore, I think you're absolutely right. There has to be a process and recognition by the organization that we may not have money, but that's okay. Industry partners can bring in, get the patient's voice to say we need that, and also create the pathway and sustain that. Because that doesn't need a lot of time and money. It's really having invested people supported by industry, like what Vodafone is doing.
Yes, of course.
Therefore, you have that process which is cost neutral from the organization point of view. That maintains as long as the process continues, so that when crisis like what we had during COVID, we were underprepared to start with. So we panicked. So for me, I think we have to have that process en route all the time alongside patient care. The one other thing I would add is that I think there is a big change in the way we are looking at healthcare delivery. I mean, during COVID, we did 100% virtual appointments for our patients. So now, 63% of my patients, they don't want to come to the hospital. They're saying, why do I need to see you when I can sit at home, maybe have my Netflix on if you're talking nonsense, but at the same time, I can sit at home and comfortably with my family member holding my hand, instead of sitting in an artificial environment which is not prepared for me to receive a bad news. So I think we are at an era where this partnership needs to accelerate. That's what I think. It needs to accelerate. The partnerships need to become more and more come together. Organizations are becoming more open for this because they realized that this is inevitable, that this partnership is going to be part of our care.
Okay, let's change the conversation slightly. Let's talk about the future, right? I think that's what people want to hear about. The technologies. I'm going to name you some technologies, talking about where we are now and we're heading towards. There's so many, right? So, Raj, you started robotic surgery recently, right? With the Da Vinci at the Royal London. Tell me about the future of robots. What are you doing now? Where do you see the future heading towards?
So, I'll just briefly touch upon what it took to do a robotic surgery. Shafi knows very well and Ian knows. So, I need to do 80 hours on a console. I need to go to 3 visiting centers to be approved, and simply because it is all based on a place where I need to be. So therefore now, for example, we are looking at immersive technologies to accelerate that learning, just from the point of how many hours a surgeon has to spend before I touch a patient. So therefore, where I see robotic surgery, it's going to be like what happened in laparoscopic surgery in 80s. In 1980s, when the keyhole surgery was started, I think a lot of people said this is the craziest idea ever. Now it is a standard of care. If you don't do that approach, people think something is wrong. You cannot do that surgery. So I think robotic surgery is here to say for certain procedures. It's not going to be for all diseases, all conditions. And what that helps us, the surgeons, to make the movements which my hand can't do. So therefore it facilitates, it doesn't replace the surgeon. My job is safe, and I'm sure all of our jobs are. But I think it just means that what we do becomes a bit more precise. Where it's going to go in the next 10 years, I think, firstly, it's going to be funded. That's key. And when I talked about randomized controlled trials, this is what has happened with robotic transplant. We haven't done a randomized controlled trial, but it's fully funded in NHS for renal transplantation because we showed the value of need, what the patient gains. So we looked at the quality of life, nothing else. So which the organization recognized that is enough to fund this, so that procedure is funded. So I think for me that's the key next step, to fund robotic surgery for certain procedures, increase the expertise beyond, and also engage with the new robotic companies, because it can't be one company monopolizing the market. So the new companies, when they talk to us, I look at them and see maybe certain robots, certain types of robots has a place for a certain type of procedure. So which means, if you ask me what I think in 10 years, there's going to be a list of procedures. We will have this procedure, that's the robot. This procedure, that's what I think we're going to get to. but this is going to be a part of our practice.
Ian, what are your thoughts about the future of robotic surgery? Do you do robotics? I can't remember.
No,
Children.
So we don't do robotic surgery. I have looked at quite a few robots because I was a massive robot envy. And the problem with the robots is they are designed for adults. The working spaces, the leverage, the size of the instruments have been designed for adults. And this is a continual frustration for me as a pediatric surgeon, is that I'm constantly looking at adult things and trying to adapt them to be used in the children's sphere. And whenever we try and talk to them, say, like, why don't you make a really, really small one version of this? They're like, well, the market's not there. I try and push it and say, well, look, we're Formula One. If you can do it in a 600-gram baby, then, you know, an 80-kilo adult will be a walk in the park. But yeah, I would love to. And I also would like to do robotics for open surgery.
What?
Open surgery.
Open surgery, okay,
Because
yeah.
the thing is we operate, you know,
Oh,
in little
interesting.
600 grammars. They're
Yeah.
tiny. It gets to the point that, you know, a bowel anastomosis for us, the bowel is, 7 millimeters across?
Yeah.
And it gets to the point of like, this is quite difficult to do this with my dexterity. I wonder if the robot with its motion scaling might be the way forward, but, you know.
So this is really
Interesting.
exciting, isn't it? Because what happens is, when we talk about robotic surgery, we talk about keyhole surgery. This is exactly what pushing boundaries are. You can do an open surgery. My hand is big hand if a child is small, but the instruments are about 2 to 3 centimeter diameter. So imagine if the child is there and the instruments are going alone. And more importantly, you have a better vision.
Yeah.
See, these are the things where the conversation helps us to move even the market, which they might have thought that there's no place for it. We can create that space. And I think pediatric surgery is a huge area where I think it's not explored yet. But the new robots which are coming into the market, they are the ones who will be certainly engaging in that one. Yeah.
So here's the thing. So robots are great, fantastic. They allow you better access, manipulation, help you a little bit. But they're expensive, right? Let's not get away from this fact, right? We talk about global health and democratizing healthcare and surgical access. Robots may not be the answer. Let's face it. Intuitive, who produced Da Vinci, they've been running the space for the last 2 decades. Their robot costs about £2.5–3 million as a capital expenditure. On top of that, you're paying per procedure quite a few £1,000s to do a case. So there's the kind of problem we have. We're trying to support healthcare across the globe, improve standards. The Lancet Commission 2015 talked about the gross inequalities of surgery across the world. Yet we're promoting these new robots, by definition, creating a bigger divide. How are we going to solve that problem? Because that's a real issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I actually had an email inquiry from one of my colleagues saying we're going to have this terrible trouble in Malawi. We want to be doing more bronchoscopies. Can you make a robot to do that? And I was like, wow, that is like so difficult. We're probably better off training more people out there to do bronchoscopies.
Yeah, agreed.
Because we are meat robots that are actually still pretty good, you know, and you know, we're still pretty, you know, cheap to run compared to actual robots. So I think it is a case of you've got to use the right tool for the right job.
Sure.
And you know, sometimes you do think the trouble with westernized healthcare is that it just keeps on getting more and more expensive and more out of the league of the rest of the world as well.
Yeah. So robots is great, and I think it is the future. I think it's coming. Costs are coming down, by the way. The CMR, the Cambridge Medical Robotics, slightly more cheaper than the Intuitive. And there's now a competition. I call it the robot wars, where it's going to be a kind of a journey to the bottom of the price. And that's great for us because it creates competition, creates better ecosystem for us, and we want lots of robots to come in. And Cambridge Medical Robotics have now just signed a deal with Wales, entire country, of implementing robots across Wales from a national perspective. And that's a big deal for companies to come into a healthcare system.
And also,
sorry.
And also, I think I would add that the robotic companies have recognized that as well. They recognize that they need to make it accessible. And I think for example, Intuitive now, because there's so many competitions, they've gone for what called as a loan model, you know, like a subscription model. They're going for it in certain countries. So I think it just means that we all need to recognize that it's not going to be replacing all procedures. It's for a very specific need. It may be that for some center in UK, robot is not available in all centers.
Yeah.
So I think that will take time, but I think they've recognized that they need to make it easier. So at some point, I think it will become standard of care for certain procedures, but
Yeah.
still, I think there's a lot of work to do in this.
Okay, let's move that next. The next technology I'll talk about, and that's the kind of whole intraoperative support. So if you look traditionally at a surgical operation, it's really based on judgment of the clinician. And we pay these people a lot of money, these two particularly, because of their years of experience in the operating theatre. Understanding things are going wrong, where structures are, for example. It's for intraoperative judgment understanding. We're now seeing a different model now with AI, with surgical navigation tools, immersive tech, maybe allowing us to now map an operation beforehand, and then during the operation, giving you support about where you should be and where you should be heading towards. I'd like to get your thoughts about the new future of that surgical operation changing and evolving.
Yeah, so this is a big area of work for our innovation hub. It's around immersive health. And for me, it's about planning and planning your operations, because we are, in many ways, operating less than we used to. You would be really surprised how little I actually operate and how little surgeons operate. You think we just spend our entire day in theatre. We don't, because operating space is very difficult to get into. So really, our operations, we should be planning them more and more so we get the best use of the time that we have, but also the best outcomes. Now, we've looked at multiple different modalities, and the one we started off with was 3D printing. And 3D printing models of the anatomy we're going to work on, and eventually working up to create models that you could actually operate on beforehand to practice. We created bone substitutes which drill and like bone so that you can practice putting in implants into it and making sure it will work. We've created tumor substitutes, we've created skin substitutes, kidney substitutes, so that we can practice beforehand. And only recently, I think that the technology for virtual reality preoperative planning has started to come into its own. And we've set up a unit where we can bring surgeons down and they can work in collaboration around large VR models to look at their anatomy beforehand and to work with the families so that we can explain to them what we're going to do so that they understand better. So this area of planning and using these different adjuncts, I think, is really exciting.
Yeah, I think this is an exciting area in training future surgeons and actually getting doctors to be interested in surgery, because that's a big problem as well. And I think the worst thing to do is stand on somebody's shoulder and keep mumbling away saying you didn't do that, you didn't do this. So, for example, in my work, I separate the surgery into phases: decision making and planning, technical skills, performance, and reflection. So it just means that 3 of those parts, I don't need to be standing next to somebody. And they can be doing it in their home because the technology is amazing. I mean, we did during COVID lectures for 50-year students. Shafi was in the hospital with this HoloLens and demonstrating the procedure, examination of a patient. And we were in the lecture room with 60 students, and there were more at home. So therefore, there are a lot of these things can be done as long as we recognize that performing a surgery, technical aspect of the surgery, can be simulated well in advance, so that when it comes to performing on the day, they are significantly prepared, better prepared, and they perform well, which just means that the patient outcomes are better. So therefore, I think for me, this is going to change the way we're going to be doing the surgical training.
Yeah, I think immersive technology is one part where I think for education simulation, it's really changed the world. There's companies like Fundamental VR, also VR in the US, who are now creating orthopedic training in virtual reality, allowing you to train yourself first and foremost before going to live surgery. In the past, we were learning literally with a scalpel in our hand, a patient in front of us. And that was wrong, clearly. I mean, literally, I remember how we all operated. When you first learned surgery as like a SHO, a Houseman, or FY1, FY2, at the end of the operation, they said, well, close the skin. And you had a needle in your hand. The anaesthetist was waking up the patient because they're desperate to get out. You're rushing around, cobbling something together. That wasn't a great way of learning and not safe for our patients, but we've accepted that as kind of the de rigueur over many decades. So I think it's great that simulation has been completely transformed with immersive technologies. And there's a couple of companies you can go and see around who are doing some of that training in our environment.
And also, Shafi, I would say, you touched upon the global health in general.
Yeah.
I mean, there are tools at the moment being used. I think you are involved in some of them, which just means that we can train surgeons in another part of the world without being there. It just means that the patient care across the globe for specialist things or even common things that's become much easier. I think that's important, isn't it? To
Yeah.
reduce the equity, you know?
Yeah, but one of the problems we have around global health, and global surgery is a passion of mine. I travel extensively around the world. If you go back to 2015, the Lancet Commission, for the first time, showcased surgery as a global problem. And it was the first non-communicable disease was shown to have huge deficits of inequity. And their data at that point showed that 4 billion people around the world, out of the 8 now there is, didn't have access to safe surgery. We had to train 3 million more people today, surgeons, anaesthetists, obstetricians, to support that and perform over 52 million more operations per year. So that was the agenda. Lancet Commission at the Royal Society of Medicine, Richard Horton and his team from the Lancet, launching it in 2015. About a year ago, I met the team from that whole Global Health Alliance, and I said, so what's happened since? Nothing's happened in 7 years. There's been no solution to global problem, which they're aware of. So here's a problem that we're facing. Shortage of doctors and surgeons around the world. The job isn't attractive anymore, let's face it. People, the millennials or the Generation Z, do not want to do the work that we were doing a decade ago. It's changed. So a question for you guys, how we solve this problem of inequity, a lack of resources, and a lack of surgeons? What do we do?
Yeah, there's no magic formula to training surgeons. They just need to do a lot of it. And we don't have them in theatre as much as we used to, and we don't have them in the hours we used to, so we're going to have to simulate it. And this is how we accelerate the simulation. So for instance, laparoscopic surgery, with keyhole surgery, sometimes you have to tie a knot with 2 grabbers. And these 2 grabbers don't have wrists on them like the robot, and it is super difficult. If a trainee asks me, can I practice doing a knot while we're doing an operation, it's a flat no, okay? Because you should have done this on a simulator beforehand. And it doesn't have to be expensive. I mean, we have got basically boxes with cameras in them that you can practice doing these knot throwings. I learned how to do knot throwing on these boxes. So you need to accelerate their learning curve up to the point that they can actually get the best out of the operating when they get there, to try and truncate the amount of time they need in surgery. That's only we're going to get more of them.
Sure.
Yeah, this is a big problem. I think we need more surgeons. I think we need to make surgery more accessible, surgical training more accessible. It shouldn't be based in operating theatre. It has to be outside operating theatre. So therefore, there are a few advantages to it. One, when you simulate, you can measure properly. See, when my registrar said as a transplant, I'm standing there, and if I didn't have a coffee, I'm a bit grumpy that morning. And that influences the way I react to his performance. So therefore, by letting them simulate outside, we can measure those things, so we can guide them better, but more importantly, make their training quicker. So therefore, when they come to actual surgery, they are well prepared in the processes what they need to go through. And also, I think the technology itself, what that means is really, it's less manpower time, the time you need it. I don't need to be there to train somebody. They can perform. So certainly it's something a lot of the, particularly training organizations, Royal College of Surgeons, we are all recognizing that one. The big problem is the funding. So therefore, that is where key industries, which has got the ability to do that, it'll be great time to partner with these organizations so that become embedded into our surgical programs.
Okay, another question for you that's going to be inflammatory. Do we need surgeons? Good question. It takes a long time to train a surgeon. 5 years at medical school, 2 years foundation program, 2 years for core training, 6 years minimum for higher training. That's about 10, 12 years of training to drain an abscess. Do we need that time of training to be able to do simple procedures? Don't we want a smarter workforce, trained nurses, allied healthcare professionals to support us? Isn't that a way of working, using the system better rather than saying you've got to spend 10 years to drain an abscess, take out sebaceous cyst? It makes no sense to me. What are your thoughts?
Completely. I'm fully with you in this. So about a month ago, we were trying to get through a backlog. Thought we'll pool all the patients. So we got 10 kids with ingrowing toenails in and just to bang through all these operations.
Yeah.
Now, I started training in 1996, okay? It does not take me to sort out your ingrowing toenail. It really doesn't, okay? That was a massive waste of a day, and I'm doing it just to clear the backlog. But what we were doing, actually, is we've been training our physicians' associates to do this level operation.
Exactly.
And I tell you, any one of you, as long as you're not totally grossed out by feet, I could train you how to do an ingrowing toenail operation 2 days maximum. In fact, there's actually a really beautiful simulator I've seen for doing ingrowing toenail thing. It's basically aggressive manicure. Okay? So we need to, because there's operations and there's operations. And also, I think there's parts of operations and parts of operations. Like there's, you know, I can get to a certain part in an operation, and then at this point, I'd be like, go, Shafi, you should probably do this bit. Okay, but I could open up. I could get to the point. You know, I could get to this bit. But then we're like, yeah, I've never done that before. So
Yes,
maybe
of
you do
course.
that bit.
Yeah.
But then we teleport. And that's where the robot, I think, could have its real
Maybe.
Impact, is if you're getting people in to do the really specialist bit of the operation. Equally, you know, if you're operating on a baby, you know, you'd be able to get in, but at that point you're like, oh, what do I do with this?
Yeah.
And I'd be able to go, right, okay, well, this is what we do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the future. I think future of surgical
Could a
care-
physician associate do a transplantation?
Okay.
That's a question. That's
Now,
what he does for a living, right?
Exactly. So we have physician associate. We were one of the early adopters in,
Yeah, you were.
in renal service in UK to have a physician associate who's a person with a science graduate degree. We train them over a year, and they go through a very clear training program. They perform sort of certain procedures, certain parts of the procedures. And I think where we started that was the biggest issue was the organization thinking, that is not safe. Now, that is the biggest thing we have to talk. Second thing is our patients. We need to talk to them and say, your procedure is done by an individual who is, in their opinion, is not a doctor. But what I found rewarding was that patients were the first one to say, okay, that means I don't need to wait longer. Because that person, I don't need to wait for 6 weeks to see you doing the procedure.
Yeah.
That's the first thing changed. Organization looked at us being more efficient with our time. Instead of sitting in operating rooms to do procedures like what you described, we became efficient care deliverers for the organization. So for me, it's inevitable that we're going to have these key people. Like in North America, surgical care practitioners have been in practice for decades. And it's phenomenal what they can do. And I was trained to do one laparoscopic surgery by a surgical care practitioner. You know, so therefore I think it is going to be a part of the way the healthcare is going to be, which is delivering a surgical care in a smarter manner and more efficiently.
Smarter, more digital. Right, I'm going to take your microphone. You share that one. Let's go to the audience and get some questions. Right, time for some questions. Hands up. I'll come round. And ask the most difficult questions if you can to our audience. Okay. Challenge them.
Thank you very much. Jackie Mayban, gynecologist from Edinburgh. I agree totally that we need to get more smart about how we train and how we deliver service. But those lists of abscesses are gold for our trainees. And what they're currently doing is are on the wards putting in Venflons. Why would we get physician associates to take away those golden opportunities and operate when we could get them doing the Venflons and our trainees in? Is that not a smarter solution to this?
Yeah, well, I suppose there's a couple of ways of thinking about it. Your abscess is a great kind of trainer operation, okay, because it takes a lot of guts to stick a scalpel onto someone. I mean, I remember the first time I did an abscess, and I was sweating when I did it, you know, because it was like, oh my God. And now, you're just like, oh, you know, it's the easiest thing in the world. But I can see why it's got its point. But by the time they get 5 years into their job, should they still be doing abscesses?
Oh,
Yeah.
I was like, just keep that with you until the end. Yeah. Okay.
But then they're doing the part of the
Yeah.
operation that you described that the physician associate should be doing. It just seems that we're going to try and solve this problem and we're just going to create another one for our trainees. We're going to get our trainees doing lists when they're a consultant, having never done a list on their own before.
No, I think you've touched upon something which is extremely important. This will put the doctors away doing surgery if you're not careful. So therefore, I think it's important to tell the trainee, future surgeons, that surgery, technical aspect of surgery, is 25% part of the surgery. So when they slice an abscess, which is a pus-filled cavity, that is just 25%. For a surgeon, so when we emphasize that to the trainee, future surgeons, they will recognize that that part can be done by a physician associate. I am not going to lose anything, but what I'm gaining is the rest of the 75% of planning, decision making, performing it, and reflecting it. And also, it just means that they train better, they engage better. So, but at the same time, how do we get the conversation? So now in medical schools, we engage with students talking in the way, looking at surgery as a phased sort of process rather than a single technical process. So I think when we explain those things, that changes, but we just need to see how we can smartly do the operating list. We can plan a list with a physician associate and a trainee, then a consultant and a trainee. So they support each other. So you create a partnership between them instead of creating a conflict or competition between them. But I agree, it's a very key thing, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a balance. I'll come back to that 1 second in the sense that we fail our trainees all the time because what they're training is a random fact. You may get a KC, you might hang around for an appendix. It's random nature. We talked about training lists 20 years ago. Dedicated training lists, remember, it's never materialized. It's still random. So we haven't sorted our own house out about getting those opportunities on a regular basis. And maybe with the 7 million people waiting for an operation, been going out to the private sector, maybe in the future, independent treatment, maybe we should create those learning opportunities. Then that way it creates much better, I guess, for the SCPs or the other allied health professionals, the opportunity also to take part without compromising other people's use. I think we need to solve that as well as ourselves. That's my thoughts. Yes?
Thank you for your interesting thoughts. I'm Saran Muthaya. I'm a specialist pediatric physio managing spasticity in children with cerebral palsy and other neuro disorders. It's really interesting you talking about the AHPs and nurses taking over. Absolutely. I trained 10 years ago. I didn't have any support. I had to use my own time, and a very good pediatrician who did injections did train me. But I had lots of battles after that. I'm an ESP who's running my own clinics now, and orthopedic surgeons come to my clinic and I go to their surgical sessions to inject, and then they do the surgery. My question here is, as a workforce, you are the converted ones here, absolutely yes. But as a workforce, how do you convey this message with your colleagues? And also, all the professions need to understand and look at this as a common theme to upskill. And that's a big challenge. Certain centers with leadership is moving forward, but not always. I work in Derby. It's not a tertiary center, but a secondary center. But I heard stories about tertiary centers where there was huge challenges, professional rivalries as well. So,
yeah, I mean, it's really frustrating. I go to America, for instance, and they're very much about, I want everybody practicing at the edge of their certification, the most that they can possibly do, so that we get the most efficient system. And if you look around NHS, you'll find very, very, extremely highly trained people doing very basic tasks. And I think that's a massive waste. So I'm like maybe one of 120 people in the country that can do a necrotizing enterocolitis operation on a crashing small baby. I shouldn't spend my entire day counseling people about constipation. So we need to be more intelligent about how we schedule our resources and how we match the problems to the tools that we have. And at the moment, it just feels random.
And I think you touched upon the change in the culture of the organizations. I think that's absolutely the biggest key to these things. And what I reflected on after COVID pandemic is that the door is just a little bit open. It's not fully open. They just open the door a little bit for people to listen to what we can say about innovative solutions. So in our unit, for example, we do something called a journal club where we review publications every week. So now I mandated every 7 weeks we do a tech paper. It's a cycle. Now that is just in one unit. And what the trainees were saying is, oh, I didn't know about that. I didn't know about this, because a lot of the sort of clinicians rely on peer-reviewed data. We like those things. We think that's what we need to use after learning from about it. So, but a lot of the technology papers are not published in those sectors. So we started doing that, and I think that is what will help in changing the culture. With regards to adoption, patients want it. So therefore, by not integrating, we are actually not delivering the best care what is possible.
Yep, yep.
And we need to be aware of, when I say we as healthcare providers, we need to recognize that. And I think it's a scary message to know that we're not doing as best as what we can because we didn't know about it. But I think that's where the partnership between industry
Yeah.
and healthcare professionals will help to change that culture.
Yeah, I think you're right. The culture has changed. And during COVID, remember, some of us, even consultants and professors, were doing some ITU shifts for nurses, for example, right? We just changed the way we had to organize the healthcare system. We had to be smarter. And maybe the culture has changed appropriately. Question at the back.
Hello there. This is Mikhail Kokinakis, pediatric surgeon from Guy's St Thomas's. We all of us are involved in clinical innovation, I suppose. I hear Ian talking about augmented reality, 3D planning. Rajesh mentioned robotics makes surgery more precise. The problems that we have, and we do this very similar things, the problems we have is we go back to the managers and we say, well, we need funding. And they say, well, are you saving money? What about the cost effectiveness? And there are things where it's okay to have the 3D printed pelvis in front of me. It helps me, it makes me more comfortable when I operate, but that's not necessarily cost efficient. And when we do studies, not necessarily we found that doing robotic surgery or augmented reality surgery is a cost efficient way. Maybe the operation takes longer. What is your advice? What do we do for this? Do we need to show that we're saving money? Is that the only way forward? Or how do you manage to get the funding for all these wonderful things that you're doing in your hospitals?
That's Ian, that's for you, I think.
Yeah. So getting funding for innovation is always difficult because if it was obvious, then we would just be doing it. Okay? So this is the catch-22. If you can make a really, really good case for it, it then doesn't tend to be that innovative because like there's a massive evidence base and loads of people are doing it, and it's just obvious we should just be doing it. So you need to somehow convince your organization to change where the risk profile is and be willing to do something which has a 20% chance of success, whereas at the moment, hospital is like a 99% chance of success and is going to deliver back in a 1-year period. You need to be able to get them to think further ahead in the future and to think also about more esoteric ways of measuring it. One way that I've tried to get robotic surgery is by pointing out that we're wearing out our surgeons by having them in unergonomic positions. It's very difficult to get the evidence base for that, but I can tell you now that 2 of our surgeons are going in to have musculoskeletal operations in the next year, and they're going to be taken out for about 6 months afterwards. Okay. I mean, if this is one thing I always, whenever we buy a new bit of kit, we say this, machine is going to take a 10% of its value per year to maintain it. It costs about maybe £8 million to get a fully experienced surgeon up to where you need them to be, but we don't spend £800,000 a year making sure they don't get musculoskeletal injuries and all the rest of it. So I think what you have to do is try and get funding for these things and need to try and get people to think in different time frames and about different units of value, and also about sometimes we should be doing things because they're the right thing to do. And trying to get less of that transactional accounting type of view of doing things and more of, we need to be doing. It's something I always say is that Aldhay Children's Hospital is one of the best children's hospitals in the entire world. We have a huge amount of resource. We're in one of the richest countries in the world, and we are one of the biggest children's hospitals in it. So if we're going to make new stuff, this is where it's happening. So we shouldn't be looking around waiting for everybody else to invent it. And it's trying to get people to take on that responsibility of, we actually have to take some risks and push some boundaries. But it is super frustrating when you get back down to, is this going to pay us back in the next 6 months? Which is what you get a lot of.
I think that's absolutely true what you're saying. It's the challenge, but the 2 things you can consider is, one, to have a trial very pragmatic, in the sense that not to expect the patient outcome what we would normally look for in a patient death or alive. We looked for efficiency. We looked at number of hours saved by procedure in a robotic procedure. So therefore, what you are showing is a real value in the cost efficiency for the organization. That's an outcome to think about. Quality of life is an outcome to think about. And also the study design doesn't have to be hip like what we used to do. We finished a study about just year pre-COVID, 21 centers, 6,200 patients, post-transplant for ultrasound project. The funding we got was £310,000. So you can imagine that study was done. So therefore, as long as it is something which clinical teams needs, it's necessary, these are done by consultants in their own time. They weren't even paid for the investigator time. So therefore, recognizing the product, the need for it, getting it time in from the clinicians who are teams who are interested, but more importantly, the study design can be smarter design than the way you used to start. I mean, we did what we call as a stepwise recruitment. We started 4 and 4 and 4 and so we went that way. So we didn't start 21 at the same time. So there are a lot of things we can do, but what that means is the funding bodies will recognize that it is a realistic, achievable trial. And it's not going to take 10 years or 6 years. It's going to take 2 to 3 year cycle. Yeah, something to reflect on.
Okay, so it's great. So St Thomas's have a big charity. They have the most money I've known in any charity in the UK, right? So they're pretty good at giving money for innovation. I think it's over 100 million they've got so in their kitty. But secondly, I think you've got to be smart. I remember when I was appointed to the Royal London 15 years ago, I was asked by Norman Williams to set up a whole laparoscopic service. There was no money. All I did is look at the cases we were using, Ethicon and others, Trocars, other instruments, and Ethicon had 100% of all the instruments, charging a lot of money. So I said, we'll have a tender, we'll save some money from the tender because everyone have to compete. I'll save 2 million in 2 years, which paid for my laparoscopic service. There's a lot of wastage happening, which you can make it efficient, and after that, we introduced it because of savings and procurement for other companies. One last question.
Hi, my name's Dr. Kostas Fantis. I've been involved in quite a few medical technology innovations. I've recently won a Smart Grant Innovate Grant Award. I think I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate as well. I really enjoyed what you were saying previously, but do you think that instead of having medical schools, we should actually start thinking about, or maybe putting in place things like robotic surgical schools and churning that around faster, or maybe artificial intelligence medical school and kind of pushing that forward as well, rather than going through medical school? I think we've started to, or we've really reached that point now.
Okay, so one of my dream jobs would be training AIs or training robotic surgeons how we operate so it can learn how to operate. I mean, that's great. And we had a project where we created a natural language platform, chatbot, for the hospital to reassure children when they were coming in so that they could ask questions in the middle of the night whenever they wanted to ask a question. And we had a team of people who were training that AI into how to do it. And we've got a number of AIs that we're now creating. They need to be trained off our data set, and we effectively have AI trainers. So eventually, I agree with you. I think some kind of branded school for medical AIs, it was trained on this data set by this people with this type of technology. I think that there's an element of that. And if that job ever comes up, I'm really up for it, okay?
That's something the future doctors, in my view, is not going to be like me. They're going to be technically adept, familiar, enthusiastic, and want to adopt. Those are the future doctors. So it just means that I'm a year 5 lead for the Barts Health for education. We are talking about introducing coding class sessions for our students in second year. We are doing ultrasound training for them in the 4th and 5th years. And also we did a study on robotic training, and students with gaming experience were significantly better and faster to learn robotic surgery than me. My daughter is somewhere here, and she was faster in doing it than me. It's embarrassing, but that's the fact. Which means really introducing them to these things early on, and so that which just means that this becomes part of their prescription or attitudes to decision making, and looking at patient care in a mixed, dynamic way rather than just based on an individual. Yeah.
Okay, so absolutely. So let's go back one step. And this is a bugbear of mine. I've been Associate Dean at a medical school for 10 years at Barts. And I was challenged by the fact that we're creating doctors not fit for 2022, right? We still train people the same way, right? It's still a 5-year program. Why is it still 5 years after 2 centuries? Who knows? Can you train doctors in 3 years, 3.5 years? Why not? Of course you can, because it's all about Google. Knowledge is different. You have to have it in your head, etc. So I started the Barts X program 7 years ago. And I just told the medical school, the dean, this is what we're doing. Our students in our 3rd year are taught by innovators, entrepreneurs, coders, developers, UI, UX teams. Yeah? Whole course for a whole year. They get to start startups. They get to pitch their ideas to Dragon's Den, funding for a company. We're bringing people from Harvard, from Singularity, from Stanford over to talk to them about design, innovation, different thinking, and being the entrepreneurs of tomorrow. We did that 7 years ago, and still no other medical school has even thought about it, right? Why not? Because doctors aren't fit for purpose at the moment. We're creating one-dimensional human beings, and I would do Imperial with Imperial X, but all medical schools should now think about the curriculum, redesigning it so it's fit for purpose. Telemedicine was coming a long time ago, but we never trained them to do telemedicine. We still don't do that in the curriculum. So we're going to change the entire way we train the next generation. Forget robot schools, let's get the basics right. Let's produce a doctor that's fit for purpose for 2022. Anyway, that's a big bugbear of mine. I go forever, talk about the challenge of medical school training. Thank you so much for your questions. Thanks to Raj and, of course, Ian for their wonderful participation. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. All right. We'll just go on.